Greetings, my dear viewers. It is I, Dreon, and welcome back to Pathfinder Hero Frame. Today we are taking a look at a ancestry that I created myself. A homebrew ancestry. This is going to be a part of a little tutorial series that I'm going to be doing to teach you how to create your own homebrew material for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. And I thought I would start off by doing the ancestries. So before we get into the actual mechanics of this ancestry that I have created, I thought I would do somewhat of a lore-based video to try to flesh out a little bit of what my homebrew ancestry is all about, because that is the first step into creating your own ancestry. You have to know why they are in your campaign. Why are they in Pathfinder 2nd Edition at all? So we are taking a look today at my ancestry, the Pachydermfolk. This is, originally this was just going to be the Hippo folk, but I was like, hold on, isn't there a term for categorizing hippos, rhinoceri, and elephants into the same group? And there was, Pachyderm. So I just called them Pachydermfolk and then added rhinos and elephants into the mix as well. The whole bit here is that they are based off of a Dungeons and Dragons race known as the GIF. Kind of hard to do that with this voice, but anyway, they are the Hippo folk. They are humanoid hippos with guns. That was my main concept, and I had actually wanted to have an encounter in Dungeons and Dragons where the players met a traveling group of trophy hunters who were hippo folk. Sort of like Clayton from Disney's Tarzan. They just want to hunt the more exciting pieces of prey. And that was how I was going to introduce Firearms to my group, was to use these hippo folk. And no, the idea of hippos, elephants, and rhinoceri, the typical prey animal for trophy hunters, being trophy hunters themselves, is not lost on me. I can see the irony. That was the whole point. That was my main source of inspiration, was trophy hunting and poachers as a whole. That was the inspiration. That was the point. Anywho, disclaimer, I do not glorify the art of poaching. If you are a poacher, you are killing an animal just for the sake of killing an animal, or for the sake of taking only one part of that animal, you are a terrible, terrible human being. Now, with that being said, I still found the idea of a trophy hunter amusing. In the world of fantasy, it works having some form of trophy hunter. And in the real world, we can actually have quote-unquote good trophy hunters, because there are instances where a trophy hunter is technically good for the sake of controlling a population of a certain animal, probably an aggressive or a pest animal, or for the sake of protecting the rest of the species Like, for example, a very aggressive member of that species is doing more harm than good for that species, they will invite a trophy hunter into the reservation to take out that aggressive individual. This is good for the trophy hunter, this is good for the reserve. So keep that in mind. There are some good trophy hunters, and I would like to say that this would work for the Pachydermfolk as well. You could have different groups of trophy hunters, some that only hunt because they feel it is necessary for the environment, then others who are like the poachers of the real world and do it just for the sake of doing it. Another thing that I thought would be interesting was to get some inspiration from the Thundercats elephant folk. Sort of a semi-religious, mystical people. I would see that as a good idea for this race as well, seeing that we also have tapir folk. Yes, the tapir is classified as a pachyderm, and another fun fact, pachyderm is no longer a usable term. That went out of style decades ago. I don't exactly remember the term that is used nowadays, but I am using pachyderm for this context. Anywho, let's go ahead and talk about the pachyderm folk. We have 4 heritages: the elephant folk, the hippo folk, the rhino folk, and the tapir folk. I sort of imagine the tapir being the main spiritualist sort of heritage, while the elephant is only secondary to a sort of shaman lifestyle, while the hippos and rhinos are more the social muscle sort of thing. Some of these backgrounds that I have chosen for a pachyderm folk, who I will be referring to as Ivona, as a sort of in-group name. I thought the alloy smith, the aspiring free captain, bounty hunter, the black market smuggler, criminal, deckhand, field medic, fortune teller, freed, slave, gold hand arms dealer, gunsmith, herbalist, hunter, mystic seer, nomad, sailor, smuggler, and thrill seeker would work perfectly for individuals such as these. I also put in the anti-magical background, and this is because I wanted some form of backstory on this ancestry before they decided to take up literal arms. Sort of a, they were enslaved, oppressed, used, for what reason could vary from ancestry to ancestry. Perhaps worshippers of Lamashtu were using them as little more than cattle, or perhaps the orcs used them, much like how we use the pachyderm of our world as a sporting animal. We hunt them and use their horns, their tusks, their teeth as sort of decorative items. After all, a human-sized skull is an easier mode of decoration than a skull that is practically half the size of a humanoid torso, of a humanoid body. So I think that would work for a sort of history for this ancestry. Another ironic background that I put on here is the circus-born and the rigger. two backgrounds that are related to the circus. This is a tie-in to how a lot of pachyderm, like the elephant, were used in circuses. And I think that would work in Pathfinder as well, seeing as a type of circus performer is known as the strong man. And that is going to be the case for the Pachydermfolk. Each one of them are the strong, bulky humanoids. And they are good at lifting things and destroying things, which is how they ended up freeing themselves from their oppressors, which is why the freed slave is on this list. And one of the ancestry feats that I came up with actually ties into overpowering their oppressors, which we'll talk more about that when we actually get into the mechanics of the Pachydermfolk. Classes that I think would make sense for a Ivorna is going to be the following: barbarians, druids, fighters, gunslingers, monks, swashbucklers, and thaumaturge. Now, the druid and thaumaturge would probably not be common, but it would be the more common of the spell casting classes. Like I said, I purposely put the background of anti-magical here for some sort of lore tie-in. Perhaps the oppressors that had, oppressed the Pachydermfolk had used some form of powerful dark magics. So now the pachyderms don't particularly like magic. The only ones that are okay with it are the elephant folk and the tapir folk. More the tapir folk than the elephant folk. I'm still trying to work that part out. So let's go ahead and take a look at each of the classes and see what subclasses might work for the Ivorna. First and foremost, we're going to take a look at the alchemist and their research field of the bomber. Like I said, I wanted these guys to be based off of the GIF of Dungeons & Dragons. Giant humanoid elephants and hippos and rhinos using guns. Gunpowder. So, a bomber would actually make perfect sense. If you're not using a firearm, you are throwing grenades left, right, and center. Moving on to the barbarian, I think the instincts of fury and superstition would work well. Especially superstition, since, again, they probably wouldn't like having magic around most of the time. They see it as something evil and harmful. So superstition could indeed work in that case. Moving on to the bard. Much like with any sort of militaristic group, something else I wanted to tie into the Pachydermfolk. Maybe they decided to form a military after they had been freed from their oppressors, and those who are not trophy hunters are some form of military group. I think it would stand to reason that a bard of the maestro or the warrior would work in those cases. Moving on to the champion. Like I stated, trophy hunting can be good, but it can also be used for evil. More often than not, trophy hunters and poachers are desecrating the land that they hunt. They are desecrating the very species. They are exterminating them. So for that exact reason, I chose the desecrator cause for a Pachyderm champion to reference the evils that trophy hunting can cause. But I also put in the Liberator in case any characters who are playing one of these Ivona wanted to free any other ancestry that is being oppressed. I think that works perfectly as a homage to the real world problem that we face with these trophy hunters, these poachers. They are purposefully causing harm to our planet by killing off these creatures. So, it stands to reason that a ancestry based off of the evils that these people do would also work. Now let's go ahead and move on to the cleric. Now I don't see many, if any, of the Ivona taking on a cleric as its class. But if they were, the War Priest doctrine would probably work more than the Cloistered Cleric. But if you were to take on a deity, I did have to do a little bit of research, but I think Gorum, Arostil, Gozre, Besmara, and Kurges, who is the god of strength, would actually work for the purposes of an Ivona character. I think. That would probably need some tweaking, but just take that with a grain of salt, I guess. I think the elephant folk of the Ivona would definitely go with Gozre, while the rhino folk would be more in tune with Gorum or even Kurges, while the hippo folk might be with Arastil if they are more aligned with nature, and Basmara if they are more in line with the more criminal activity that a trophy hunter is in tune with. So moving on to the druid, I would say the tapir folk and the elephant folk would be more likely to take on the druid. And if you were to make an Ivona druid, I would recommend either the animal order or the wild order. Moving on to the gunslinger. This will probably be the most common class that a Ivona would take. Probably. For the ways that a gunslinger Ivona would take, I would say the sniper, trigger brand, and vanguard. Though the trigger brand would probably be less common than the sniper and vanguard. Moving on to the investigator. Something about an elephant and a rhinoceros cop just amuses me. Just these two pictures from Zootopia were hilarious, and I thought I would mention it in this video. It probably won't happen too often, but it would make some sense, especially if you have an Ivona who is more in line with trophy hunting should only be used when the environment is in danger of itself. So that is mostly what I'm going for here. But the methodologies that I think would work for an Ivona investigator would be the alchemical sciences and the interrogation. Moving on to the oracle. This one would probably be more of the tapir folk, but the elephant folk could also work. The mysteries that I think would work best for the Ivorna are going to be the mystery of battle and mystery of cosmos, which I would see the cosmos more in line with the Pachydermfolk. Moving on to the rogue. Big, beefy individuals. I would definitely see the Ivorna having the rackets of the ruffian and the scoundrel. Sort of kind of like a Rocksteady from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Just a big, muscular pachyderm folk taking on acts of crime would actually make sense. Probably even work as a bodyguard for a certain organization or a certain individual. I think it would make sense in that regard. Moving on to the swashbuckler, I would say the only style that would work here is the braggart. Mostly, again, for the trophy hunting aspect. You're bragging about your latest kill. You just took down some mighty beast, said to be a child of Rovagug or something. Something like that. Some sort of tall tale of some form. And with that being said, that is all the time I have for you today. What do you think of the Ivorna? Let me know in the comment section below. And if you're looking for the mechanics behind this ancestry, or if you are looking to create your own homebrew ancestry and heritages, stay tuned for Thursday's video, where I'm going to see if I can figure out exactly how to do that. Until next time, this has been Drehan, and I am offline.